themes and questions that I want to address today and please before you. I'd like to start with something which is a document, a kind of newspapers. I'd like to start with. So, this plan to do a set of public classes, to create a kind of public seminar course in which all of us are able to discuss and work out some problems that we are concerned with. All these ideas were given to me and students approached me towards the end of last year, in December. And just about then, I was thinking, I like the idea very much. It was very challenging, of course, very daunting, but I was still kind of thinking of taking it up, this challenge. And I was wondering, what should I really talk about? What should be the set of problems that I should investigate and create a kind of research forum for all of us? Yeah. So I was thinking of questions of caste because I've already worked on certain things related to reading Ambedkar, but also with respect to politics and so on and so forth, philosophy and politics and so on and so forth. So exactly around that time, I read in the Times of India a very small report brought out by a reporter. Something which we all know, but it was brought out in a very clear graphic form, literally a graphic form. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch upon what this report is today, and maybe with the help of Rakesh and Simriti and others, I don't know if that's possible in the next class, if we can actually project it on a screen or something, please make photocopies and circulate it. We'll see, but that's for next time. But I'd like to tell you what this report is about. It's based on the census, and it's a report about the nature of jobs that scheduled castes, scheduled tribe, members from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes that they are employed in relation to non-scheduled caste and scheduled tribe population. The nature of employment, the kind of jobs that people are employed. Yeah? Among the people who are employed. So we're not talking about unemployed people who are employed. What are the kinds of jobs? So there are three. So it's the report, but with three tables, color coded. So the first table, the first graphic. That's why it will be nice, maybe in the next class, if possible, to project it. Then we can actually see what's going on. But I'll just talk about it. In the first graphic, we have what are called good jobs, jobs which are aspirational. So the word used is aspirational jobs. So that's the first category of jobs. The second category of jobs is middling jobs. Yeah. And the third category is lowly. So these are three sociological terms that I use: aspirational, middling, and lowly. Now, what we have here is a description of the percentage of SC/ST population, people belonging to SC/ST categories, who are employed in these kinds of jobs. So we'll come to what this graph shows, based on the census. So this is literally just 2018, 2 months back. But what would be a kind of expectation based on what we were talking about last time? One expectation could be that if society, like for instance Dr. Ambedkar very clearly shows, is graded, is divided and granulated according to strata, grades, and there are many such grades from the top to bottom, then occupationally, in terms of the nature of jobs, from aspirational to low, there will also be a kind of graded distribution populations from different social groups who will be employed in certain kind of jobs. So in that sense, from aspirational to lower jobs, one could expect, it's possible to expect, a kind of grading, a kind of distribution which goes from, let's say, from very low, almost 0%, to slowly moving up to, say, 60-70%, and on the other side, something which is from 60-70% in lowly jobs, slowly going down to 10%, 5% and less. So kind of graded distribution also the occupation structure. But when you look at this graph, you see something which is quite contrary to this expectation. So what you see is that among the aspirational jobs, which of course you expect to be monopolized or occupied by mostly upper class people, and that is the case, the examples of aspirational jobs being corporate managers, can't see very well, but corporate managers, doctors, let me see, a legal profession, higher up positions in legal profession, and so on, technically very skilled jobs, and so on and so forth. So in that, SC and SC taken together, the average employment of all these jobs is around 2%. 2 and sometimes moving a little beyond. No, sorry, not 2. More than 2. Within 20%. Within 20%, but between 10 and 20. Sometimes less than 10 and a little bit ahead of 10. But more or less, always less than 20. So none of these jobs, corporate managers, legal profession, doctors, skilled engineers and so on and so forth, all of these jobs you get more or less than 10%, a little more than in one or two places, a little more than 10%, but less than 20 definitely. Then you come to the middle jobs.
So will professors also be included in this?
Professors, yeah, professors. So that. So then you come to the middling jobs. So in the middling jobs, what you find is jobs like tailors, okay, people who are working as in the security business. So not so in the lowly jobs you'll have watchmen, but not here. You'll have people who are working in the services sector, security services. But even in the you could expect that in these kinds of jobs the percentage would increase a little bit. From 20 moving beyond 20 to 40. But that does not happen. That does not happen. You see that nearly in all of these jobs, tailors, people who are working with the press, the washer, with washing, laundry service, all of these jobs, drivers, all of these jobs, which are basically some are jobs of nature of services, you still see the percentage more or less around less than 20. Maybe a little more than 10 sometimes, 15, 16, but less than 20. It doesn't go beyond 20. Even in the middle ages. So this is a bit of a surprise. At least I was surprised when I looked at this statistic. So the graded distribution of work is not really applying. And then you come, so interestingly what Hiba asks, teachers are in the middle. Teachers, it doesn't say professors. We could say professors of say JNU and IIT would go up in the aspirational jobs. That anyway, SCST is less than 10. But when it comes to teachers, that is school teachers, even then, what you have is less than 20%. Yeah, 10, 12, 30%. And then you come to the lowly jobs. So lowly jobs are what? You have watchmen. Now we come to kind of watchmen. Alright? Then you have doorkeepers. And then you have domestic help. Then you have construction workers. You have labor in manufacturing, informal labor in manufacturing. Yeah? And till here you again find, okay, the percentage is increasing a little bit, nearing 20, but it's still not substantially crossing 20. That also surprised me. It's not crossing 20. Within the lowly jobs, then come two categories, and the story changes in a flash. And those categories are leatherwork and sweep, safai karmachari. And what you have is a tremendous increase in the range of SC/ST employment. And you have with leatherwork moving from 40 to 60%, and with safai karmachari, with sweepers, it's between 60%, and maybe more. So you see, here is an absolutely graphic example of the question of the failure of the idea of division of labor. In terms of the graded nature of society, even if you take a graded nature of society, but even then, and the division of labor is hierarchical in terms of the nature of work. So between, and we have to talk about it in relation to Mao's thought, because Mao was deeply concerned with the question of the hierarchy between manual labor and intellectual labor. But that concept of the hierarchy between manual labor and intellectual labor, which was a concern of Maoism in Mao's own work, we are going to take it next time, but that criterion doesn't work here on the face of it. Because what you have is that instead of a grading of the people belonging to lower social groups would also then be working in lower kinds of occupations, which would be many kinds of manual work or many kinds of informal service work, less skilled work and so on, non-intellectual work and so on. It doesn't work like that. Of course, relatively a little more, but actually it is a division of laborers. You have two kinds of laborers who are totally fixed, it seems. Leather work and safai. Now this is a very striking picture, very striking statistic, which immediately makes us think of the relationship of the economic, capitalistic idea of division of labor and the social and the specific caste feature or the caste reality of division of labors. And how the one does not map onto the other. Even though you do have a graded society in which there are infinitely graded social groups in terms of the hierarchy between the higher castes, the higher groups, castes and groups to lower, and moving within the lower, a granulated hierarchy. Nevertheless, the dominance of the SC/ST caste is in two occupations. Now the question is, how does one think about this? So again, this is not going to be the sole topic on which I am going to talk about today. I want to build this problem as we go along in relation to the larger questions of class and caste as we go. We're going to do that. But I want to still mention a few possible hypotheses, a few possible theories of looking at this picture. So one obvious picture would be that these two occupations, leather work, people who are working in leather, manufacture of shoes and other kinds of work which actually involves leather, which means again handling of animal skins, and safai, and within safai a whole range of jobs to be done. Now clearly manual scavenging cannot be part of this. Why? Because manual scavenging is criminal. So it cannot be part of official statistics. It cannot be part of census. So anyone cannot talk about manual scavenging here. And yet, we have to obviously keep that in mind. As among the lowly jobs, among so-called safai, one of which is associated with untouchability. Keeping that in mind, we see leatherwork and and safai completely dominate the SC/ST part of the population. Now, so one hypothesis is that this is because the nature of these jobs is degraded. The nature of this job is so lowly. So let's use the categories used in the report. So lowly that only a certain section of population is made to do it, and they're kind of kept imprisoned in that. So that's one hypothesis. So the division of labor is actually a division of labor. Only thing is, this division of labor is not according to the laws of the market. It's according to the laws of society. So it's not labor in that sense, it's the nature of the work which is undignified, which is degraded. So that could be one hypothesis. But of course you see the difficulty with this hypothesis. One difficulty is this hypothesis would mean, again to go back to the point, that something like sweeping, safai means some one job, one kind of job, which is intrinsically degraded. Now, of course, safai is a lowly job, but there are many kinds of work that is involved in safai. So, working actually in sanitation and working at the level of certain other kinds of cleaning jobs is not exactly the same, though there is a continuum. And many of the employees, safai कर्मचारी, are involved in a range of these jobs. And again, I'm not counting something which is criminal, which is manuskar. But there is a continuum. So you could, of course, speak of the range. Yet in the range, you will accept that they are not the same. In that sense, to say that it's safai, sweeping, which in itself is a job, does not quite meet the requirements of clarity. It's not clear to us. What is this degraded job which is safai? Though of course, relatively speaking, we see it's a lowly occupation or set of work. That's the first. With leather work, of course, it becomes even more interesting because there we think of lowly not in terms of the job, as in terms of stigma related to a specific sociological property, which is something to do with animal. Something to do with animal skin, something to do with the value or the anti-value or the degraded kind of a reverse of value in relation to the social meaning of specific animals. So then, again, it's not an economic criteria. It is social, but it is not only physical. It is a value which is attributed to it, on which there is a certain kind of group of population, the caste of a certain group, which is completely sort of fixed. But it doesn't really satisfy the hypothesis that it's the nature of the job. It is the nature of the job, but the nature itself is not in the job. That is the physical nature of the job. It is partly that, surely, but it is something to do with the interpretation of the job in terms of social symbolism, with stigma. So there is indignity in the job, but the indignity is also a concept of dignity which is related to the nature of the symbolic economy, not just the job and the money economy. So that is one thing that we have to keep in mind when we want to discuss the question whether this is a question of specialization. So even unskilled labor can be thought of as weak specialization but still specialization. So suppose you say that you have a part of the population, family almost hereditary, they are doing one kind of job, so which is very common, safai कर्मचारी. Family after family, though of course there is also change. So a lot of children of parents or safai कर्मचारी do move into other professions, but still a long line of people who work in the same hereditary, not because they believe in it as a hereditary occupation. That is a Hindu Brahmanical ideology or dogma. But because they don't have opportunities to move anywhere else. Now, given this kind of a social reality, is this a kind of strange, perverted idea, but still an idea of specialization? Specialization of the nature of the job, leather work, safai. This could be a hypothesis. But then, this hypothesis would mean that these people from these particular castes are doing this work in terms of, now we come to a particular economic concept of labor time, the time that they give to it, as the only time that they give to this kind of work. So a leather worker is actually, even if he or she is working in a degraded profession, in a lowly job, is a specialist in that job insofar as she gives all her time. It's a labor time which is then converted into some kind of wage. Similarly with Safai कर्मचारी. So to that extent, it is still a kind of official, institutional, though highly discriminatory, but a kind of list of jobs, official jobs, which is understood in terms of labor time. The people who give their labor, that is their time, to those jobs. So this could be a hypothesis. A kind of meeting point between the economic idea of labor time, that is the class from which class follows, and the idea of something which is a fixed caste occupation, which is the division of laborers into specific kinds of jobs. You could have a meeting point. But this will not hold true theoretically in terms of thinking about it. If you find that these people, the members of this particular sections of society, SC/ST, so of course you can always say not all SC/ST do the same kind of job. So I spoke about Mahar last time and I'm coming to it in a moment. But the Valmiki and the Mahar are not doing the same thing. You could always point that out. But that's exactly the point I'm coming to. Now, if you find, suppose if you find that some of these castes, some of these social groups, the members of that particular social group, who mostly are employed as Safai कर्मचारीs, as leather workers. So for instance, you would say the caste which is Kamar is employed in that profession. And yet, in this degraded sense, perverted sense, still a profession, in the sense of specialization, with that economic idea of specialization. This gets disturbed, this hypothesis gets disturbed when you find, if you find that is, some of these people, or all of these people mostly, or many of these people, actually their time occupied even in their leisure time. That is the time when they are not working with leather, when they are not working as Safai कर्मचारी. But their time is not their own. That is, someone who is a Safai कर्मचारी is also doubling up or tripling up or whatever as someone who is doing other menial lowly jobs for some kind of a master. So, for instance, so I'll take an example. In Ambedkar's annihilation of caste, he talks about caste from Madhya Pradesh at that time, central province, which is a Balai caste, not the Choudhury caste, but Balai caste. And this caste, you start looking at Balai men and women, and you see that what is the kind of work that they do. And you find that, for instance, that the Balai men, they sing as performers, as musicians, in village weddings. They're called by upper caste members also of the village to sing. So you think, okay, they are a lowly caste, but they do the work of singing. But then, when you read a little more, you see that, and interestingly, this is also based, I forgot this. Ambedkar is also basing this entire analysis on a Times of India report. Yeah, at that time, didn't you? It is based on a Times of India report from that time. So, you find that the Balai women are asked to perform the role of midwives when an upper caste woman is in labor. So then you think, okay, it's a division, it's a gender division of labor. Yeah? So women are midwives and men are, say, singers. But then you find that when there is a death in a village that is a few kilometers away, where there are no means of transport like buses or cars, then at night if someone dies, an upper caste person dies, and the news has to be delivered to their relatives in the neighboring village, then a Balai person has to run in the middle of the night to that village to inform the relatives. Then you see, oh, they are messengers. And this goes on. So you realize that the specialization format or parameter or criterion does not work. So the singer is also messenger, is also midwife, is also many others. And you get one fundamental criterion. one fundamental analytic clarity or an analytic parameter which kind of clarifies the situation, which is their time is not their own. So you can actually visualize it. At any moment they can be called upon to do something. So even if they're spending a lot of their time in doing something very specialized, whether it's leather work, whether it's something else, whether it's say music, which is tremendously specialized. What can be more specialized than music? Yet, it cannot be classified as specialized labor in the sense that specialized labor is where you give your labor time. Your time of labor, exclusively. Though of course you see the difference. In the Banai case, there are no wages. So this is part of the Vatan system problem that we saw in Mahar. That the Mahars are doing several things, though they are a kind of nature of some kind of a watchman work, watching over in the boundaries of the village. So it is a kind of what in contemporary American biopolitics is called human terrain system, HTS. Yeah, it's a very powerful and very disturbing military concept, human terrain system, where the human beings are terrain. So in a way the Mahars are employed in a kind of human terrain specialization within the village system. A kind of biopolitical work that they do. But at the same time, what you find is between the Mahars and the Balai, there is no wage. There is no wage. There is only services for which there is patronage. There is a kind of Vatan system. There are gifts. So to that extent, the economic concept of labor does not apply. Now, this is not true of the 2018 graphic. Really, these are official jobs. So that's why I don't include manual, the census doesn't include manual scavenging. An official job for which there's a wage. Here, the jobs are wages. So you would, by official terms, you would say that, all right, at least even if the jobs still remain lowly, and two kinds of jobs dominate the time of the population from several SC/ST categories, nevertheless, there is at least a specialization that it is officially their job. But that might not hold true. Suppose, and this requires field work, this requires actual investigation, which we can, in the discussion we can share your work. I'm sure some of you do that work more deeply than I do it all. But still, we can discuss this. At a pinch, from a kind of intuitive as well as a kind of lived social experience in India, I would think it's a good hypothesis that even people who are employed in leatherwork and Safai Karmachari work are also performing a range of services for the upper classes and upper classes at the same time. Which, for instance, surely a doctor or a professor is not. A professor is not providing informal services to any other class of person. In the way that Safai Karmachari probably is and a leatherworker probably is. Though I have not studied this, we can share our findings later. But suppose for the moment, we accept this hypothesis, we accept this share, then the question arises, and that's the theoretical question I'm interested in, then the question arises, that can we think of this economically? Can we think of this kind of work in terms of value as defined by economic value? Whether you think of economic value as the value which labor creates, or you think of it in money terms, that is wages. Can you actually rigorously and satisfactorily think of these jobs, even if they are officially jobs for which wages are paid? Unlike Ambedkar in 1930s when he is preparing the lecture for annihilation of caste. That difference is there. Nevertheless, in terms of real social practice, does the category of wage work satisfy the nature of not the work, but the time? The time of the person who belongs to SC or ST in this class. And to that extent, I think, the problem of service comes back even to an occupation which otherwise can be seen as a more or less identifiable form of labor. Insofar as in 1936, if you remember, in the Independent Labour Party movement, Ambedkar was concerned with what? He was concerned with enforcing the principle of labor by trying to dismantle, reform and eventually abolish the working system. So make the Mahar, in some senses, a participant in the market for wage labor. Instead of he or she being already completely entrenched and imprisoned in the division of laborers, which is the Mahar, as being essentially what the Mahar is. That is, just performing services in the village. So Ambedkar is trying to break that. And he's trying to bring in, like I said last time, a principle of labor. Enforce the principle of labor. Enforce the notion of class. Even when there is no class. Even when the notion of class is not working, not mechanically at least. Through the entry of independent labor party. Now, what happens to the effort and so on, how much is it a success and failure is something else, which we'll talk about later. That's not my point today. My point is that analytically speaking and theoretically speaking, is it satisfactory to talk in terms of labor as a category, or do we need to think of labor in a way that is actually able to address the question of this kind of social reality of division of laborers, which means not labor, but the laborer as the totality of the human being, the social human being, in which labor is a part. And yet, the labor is something which is highlighted in terms of its degraded, undignified extraction of the time of the human being. So the human being's time and the human being's time being appropriated for degraded work. This distinction we must make. So I don't think I'll be able to manage, I'll be able to write all this down, but you can make a note of these categories. Human being as defined by time, as a subject of time, and that time which is extracted or appropriated for specific degraded occupations. Which is different from saying that the human being who provides labor time for a degraded occupation. So you see, something I'm going to address next time, the ironic relationship, I call it, between Ambedkar and Mao. Mao, who was a great thinker and a revolutionary thinker of the breakdown of the effort, of the project, the cultural part, of breaking down the distinction of manual labor and intellectual, the hierarchy between manual labor and intellectual. So in a way, the Cultural Revolution was part of that project. But that project still was premised on the theoretical accuracy and the theoretical relevance of the category of division of labor. Does that hold true in this case? This is the question. I'm not giving an answer to it. I'm calling it an ironic relationship, an ironic counterposition. Yeah. But I'm trying to set up the terms in which to think of the question, which I'm calling the distinction between the human being as a creature of time, or subject of time, or subject to time, and that time then being extracted or appropriated for specific degraded occupations. Rather than the human being defined immediately as a subject of labor. Alright? So this would be a kind of distinction, or kind of articulation between the social individuality of human beings as they belong to specific social groups, which provides to them an experience of society, and the social individual as a primarily economic agent, which is labor. This is at stake. This clarification is at stake. Both theoretically, but also in terms of the different experiences of the history of labor in different societies, including the society in which Marx worked, which is the history culminating in a certain kind of capitalism, world capitalism, beginning from Europe, and the history in which Ambedkar is placed in 1936 when he is trying to produce a certain rupture within a kind of oppressive continuity of the services of the Watan system. Watan system is only exemplary. The paradigm is service. Service is unpaid. But also service not as labor. Service as a direct appropriation of time. Direct and total appropriation of time. which is what I'm calling, through contemporary military biopolitical language, the human terrain system. A capture of the human terrain system. So in that sense, untouchability is a kind of capture of the human terrain system. If the human is a terrain, all of the terrain is captured. At no moment is the human being left to pursue his or her sort of free time, kind of a time of freedom, a time of leisure. Instead of that, what you have is a kind of terrain. Though of course the metaphors are mixed here. Terrain is a spatial metaphor, and I'm also speaking of real time, but that's all right. It's a kind of temporal terrain basically. Now, if you more or less are able to follow this fundamental problem and this distinction, then I think it's very important to take a step back and look at the stakes of labor in the classical sense of how the problem of labor and the category and what I'm calling the principle of labor emerged in its fundamental ground of the discourse of Marxism, and particularly the writings of Marx. Again, to clarify methodologically, not to say that that's the category into which the rest of labor is going to fit in, because precisely you've started out with an inconsistency. You've started out with a problem. That's why I distinguish again, to repeat, between the principle and the problem. The principle is either an a priori universal truth which is meant to capture all the problems and solve them, or every problem is an exigency, brings the effort of thinking to produce new principles. So the question is labor an a priori principle or a truth which all human beings in any case essentially must be in a sense part of, or to which human beings belong? Labor is a fundamental being to which, not being, but an activity of the being, which is the human being. Or is labor a historical principle in response to a particular problem, which is when the real experience of society is not able to quite meet the category of labor in its full comprehension. So in a way, the question of service or the problem of service is like that. It is labor, and yet it cannot be quite satisfied by the category of economic labor or the economic definition of labor. And this is what Ambedkar is bringing out and also trying to solve by the enforcement of the principle of labor in 1936 through organizational means, which is ILP. So if you take a step back now and look at the formation of this principle and the difficulties in the formation of this principle of labor through Marx, then I think that's worth doing. And I'd like to do that with you for the next hours. Now, Marx has a very clear definition of labor in Capital. If you read around 200 pages of Capital, 1864 I think, you at a certain point you get a very precise, not a beautiful in the sense of anything which is aesthetically beautiful, but in terms of precision a very beautiful description of what is labor. Again, it's very difficult for me to read in this slide, but I want to try. I don't want to, paraphrase all the time. And I want to tell you from where I'm quoting. I also have Capital. I could have quoted from Capital. But this class is also, like I said last time, is also an effort, a shared effort, to arrange texts of different contexts and different milieus in response to specific problems in certain interesting strategic ways. So that's why I'm reading from a text which I'll explain. Why I'm reading from a text which is actually a secondary text. It is not Marx. This is a text by someone else. And yet I'm quoting from that text. And it's a quote from Capital. And the quote is, labor then of use values as useful labor is a condition of human existence which is independent of all forms of society. It is an eternal natural necessity which mediates the metabolism between man and nature, and therefore human life itself. So the amplitude of this definition is so vast. So what does it say again? It says it is not historical. So in a way what we are reading from Capital is a refutation of my construction of historical principle. He's saying, no. Labor is not historical. Here at least he's saying, labor is eternal. Labor is part of natural necessity. And then he uses a metaphor, again a metaphor, to express this kind of fundamental nature of labor. And the metaphor is that it mediates between the metabolism between humans and nature. And in that sense, it is essential to human life itself. Now you might think that this is not a metaphor, this is actually metabolism. But it is not metabolism. Metabolism belongs to the life processes of a physiological being. Society is not physiological. The moment it brings interaction between a human being, human life, which could be understood as physiology, no problem, biology. But the other side is not biology. The other side is nature. Nature is, of course it's physiological, biological, but nature is a wide spectrum of many kinds of lives and many layers, from non-organic life to organic life to something like social life also, which is not divorced of nature. So to that extent, when you say that it is a metabolism, it mediates, labor mediates the metabolism between human beings and nature, then what you have is a very, very difficult and dense description, though apparently very clear and beautiful, of something which is a process. Clearly it's a process, but you are not sure of the nature of this process, the exact reality of this process. Is this process something which is in the domain of social, cultural and economic idea of labor, that is something which is to do with manufacturing, something which is to do with how we understand labor, that is factories, products, commodities, consumption of commodities and so on and so forth. But does it have something to do with a kind of extension of nature? When you say it is a metabolism between man and nature, it also seems that man and nature enter into a kind of process, but which is a process of the life process itself. It is not a process which is based on any kind of intellectual positing. So a word that I'd like to write is, it is not based on positing. It's a word from Hegel, the word which Hegel was very fond of. Again and again he would talk about positing. From the word positing you get the word which is a word from geometry, position. But it's also a political word. When someone says, this is my position, I'm a Marxist, I'm an Ambedkarite as opposed to Marxism. I'm a Marxist who has difficulties with Ambedkarism, and so on and so forth. Each is a position. But a position is not something which is natural. A position is something which you arrive at. And how do you arrive at it? You arrive at it through a whole range of things, your experience, your reading, of course, your reading, but eventually and that's the word Hegel would use, you're positing. So positing is a kind of externalization of your experience, including your intellectual experience, to a certain position, which is a position of thought, which is a kind of hypothesis, which is like an argument, and eventually it is also something which becomes a subject matter of certain kind of commitment. But the commitment is not separate from the thought. So a position is something you arrive at, but you also stick to it. So is labor a positing, a position? For it to be a position, it must go through something like an intellectual process, something like thinking. But thinking comes from where? Is there something which is natural and yet it is thinking that's very difficult to... You might talk about the physiology of the brain and all that. We'll come to modern biology in a moment. Nevertheless, something like thinking has to come from a kind of leap, a kind of place which is not clearly identified as a natural place, organic place, or a place of life. So you can't really say which part of life leads to thinking. You can't say that you can think about it. You can think about the properties of life. Biologists also thinkers. No doubt about it. But you can't say this part of the biologist, that is the biologist's biology, if I may say something so horrible. Yeah? That leads to thinking. So thinking involves a leap. Thinking involves something like a moment which is a void moment. You're not very sure from where it originates, and yet it has its effects. So to that extent, can we make the metaphor a little more interesting, even if we complicate its elegance, and say that this metaphor of metabolism is actually, it contains something which is like a leap. And can we then use an even slightly heavier word and say this leap is ontological? That labor is not something which is simply coming from natural, nature and natural necessity. Labor is not something which is simply the human being acting in a certain kind of automatic way to do whatever he's doing or she's doing. But labor is a kind of positive. Labor is a kind of leap into a plan. Labor is a kind of plan. There is no labor without a plan. Labor is an orientation. And that's why, to make this concrete, with labor what you need is means of labor. Now, there can be two means of labor. Means of labor, raw material. So to that extent, nature. No doubt. So to that extent, labor is part of nature. Marx is saying, labor is part of nature. Labor is coming from nature. Labor is doing something with nature. But insofar as it is coming from nature and yet doing something with nature, mediating nature, labor is also something which gives nature something which does not have. Which is, and that's why I quote from a book, which is a book of philosophy. And that's why the genre of philosophy, as coming from Marxism, is something we have to take very seriously. A book by one of the most influential and scary Marxists from the early 20th century, called Lukács. Influential because he was one of the great intellectuals, the greatest philosophical thinkers, who wrote extensively on Marx, through Hegel and all that. Scary because he was also one of the absolutely dogmatic defenders of a certain kind of orthodoxy in Marx. And orthodoxy as embodied in the party, in the communist parties. And I don't want to go into the story of Georg Lukács, but he's somebody who actually moved from the Hungarian Communist Party to Russia, and in a sense was also within Europe a kind of internationalist figure, but an internationalist party figure. And at the same time as an intellectual, probably the most respected intellectual also. So Georg Lukács initiated a project which he called Ontology of Social Being, of which he wrote three parts. And when we were students in JNU, then those 3 volumes would always be there as kind of 3 totemic volumes at Gita Book Center. Now we only get it off the, off the internet, where there are only taboos, no totems. So the 3 books were Ontology Hegel, Ontology Marx, and the third one, Ontology Labor. So I thought I should reread these texts after more than 20-25 years. So I haven't been able to read all of them. I was looking at Ontology Labor, where I rediscovered this quotation from Marx. But I also found how Lukács, as a philosopher, is also not accepting Marx simply at the level of the literally the beautiful expression. He's saying that in labor there is a leap. Labor is a positive. So labor introduces teleology. That's what Lukács says. Labor introduces a plan. Labor introduces that which nature does not have, which is end, goal. Labor brings goal. So that's why when you make something, you already have a goal. You already have a target. So it's a teleology, telos. In Greek, telos is like end. So end has both meanings. Something which you aspire to, and also something which, if you achieve, closes the process. So labor is both teleological, but also labor is finite. So you achieve labor, you accomplish labor. But you don't empirically accomplish labor. You don't empirically accomplish anything, according to Lukács. You only accomplish something for which you posit. So that's why it's very close to Hegel. So the real world and the positing action cannot be separated from each other. Unless you posit, nothing happens. And when something happens, then it doesn't go without being positive. So labor is something which happens, which you do, which people make, individually and collectively. But in doing it, you also posit in the world something which was not there before. To that extent, it is a conceptual exercise. It doesn't matter what you do. You don't have to be, a philosopher to be a laborer. On the contrary, philosophers are known not to do anything. Not to labor, at least, in the hard sense of the word. And yet, it's the other way around. And this is something which will also gain a certain kind of prestige, a certain kind of praise, in Gramsci particularly. That the worker is a thinker. The worker is a philosopher, not the philosopher who should be a worker. That is a kind of obvious, dissatisfaction with academic philosophy. That philosophy must also do something. And it is also inspired by Marx's famous dictum that philosophers hitherto have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. Yeah. From thesis and form. So, all of that is there. But we are talking the other thing, from the other direction. The work itself involving a thinking. Even if it's lowly work, even if it's an ordinary work, but it involves a thinking, a positive, something which is positive. So this is what Lukács is greatly interested in. Labor as a kind of positive. Labor as teleology. But for teleology it is a leap. You can't find teleology in continuity with life process. Life process clearly can be distinguished in two layers at a very amateur biological, sort of zoological, biological surmise. One is a non-organic, physiochemical process, and an organic process, physiological, organic process. So you do not have a continuity from the physiochemical to organic to something which is thought, something which is human in that sense. No. To have an idea of the human is already a leap. But the leap constitutes something which in Lukács becomes very important. And that's why, and that's the main point here. You would easily think that Lukács is praising labor. Labor as a kind of originary positive. In that sense, labor is the principle of being human. Labor, so this is a question, also an answer or response to what Praveen was asking the other day. So, is labor something which is already historical and economic, as in capitalism, the way capitalism understands labor? Or is labor something fundamentally anthropological? So this is a very important question. But in Lukács's view, it is not the question of labor which governs the human being. It is the question of the human being which determines labor. So labor is actually something which is a mediation. So to go back to Marx, labor is mediation. Labor is not the original principle. The original principle is something which is human, something which is the specificity and the generic singularity of the human being, for which labor is an example, a paradigm. But if you take the two together, then something very concrete and uniquely human happens. And that is why Lukács's project is a project of ontology of social being. That is, in simple words, what is constituted is a philosophy of society. So labor, in other words, is not the principle. Principle is something like social activity, social praxis. And insofar as we talk about human beings, there is nothing else but generic human activity as social activity, or social praxis. Labor is only a physical embodiment or example of that. So that's why labor is not the principle. The principle is something like social individuality or social humanity or generic social being. But labor is an articulation of that. And that's why you need to study labor, which Lukács is doing as a philosopher. This is a very systematic and a very exhaustive kind of project that Lukács takes. And in a way you think that he finds his support from nearly all of Marxism. Yeah? From the early works of Marx. I'll just take three great works. I mean, there is a range of works of Marx, we can talk about it as we go along. But I'm going to take three of his economic works. So, Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, Grundrisse, which I've already introduced, from 1857 to 1859, and of course Capital. For the moment, I will only talk about the first volume of Capital, because that is what concerns us in terms of definition of labor and so on and so forth. So you would think Lukács finds for his magisterial, big philosophical project, a kind of consistent support from Marx, and inspiration. Culminating in this definition that Marx gives of labor as mediation between the metabolism of man and nature, human being. Now, if this is the case, then you should find in the history of Marxism a kind of consensus on labor as the mediation between something like a fundamental ontological singularity or speciality of the human being. Yeah. And on the other side, something like the constitution of society as fundamentally based on this metabolism between man and nature, which is provided by labor. So labor as the means of society. But of course, it's very interesting, no? You could immediately think about this, that yes, labor is a means of society, but labor itself always requiring means. So you don't have labor without raw materials in nature, but also, very importantly, labor without tools is inconceivable. So, the history of labor is also a history not of labor, that is abstract pure labor, but something which is always the history of the environment of labor, which is a technical environment. Or you could say the history of technology. But of course the word technology is very misleading because it immediately brings to mind something which is there to be used for application. Or it is rather applied knowledge. Technology is kind of applied. Technology itself doesn't seem to be knowledge. Science seems to be knowledge, and technology seems to be something like a utilization. That is not really the case. If you look at the word technology, then you immediately see that it is something which is saying something different. Which is saying the knowledge of technique. So it is not knowledge in the sense of pure science, that is true. It's not knowledge of physics in the pure sense of physics. But it is at the same time not the use of physics for, making a bridge or making a building or making a bomb. It is the knowledge of the technique. So it is a knowledge. Technology is not only application. Technology is an application which in the same breath is the positing of that application. So again, to use the Hegelian word or the Hegel's word through Lukács, technology is also positing. Technology is not simply something applied brutally to the world and you go from there while science is positive. Science is thinking. No. Technology is as much thinking. But of course, thinking on a plane which is different from pure science. So this distinction has to be kept in mind. So the first level of this thinking, which is also making, is the tool. So Lukács says something very interesting. He says there are two kinds of tools. One is a tool which is more improvisational, something which is more improvised. Which means what? Which means that in that sense we are looking at a kind of history which is very close to evolution, from primitive to more developed stage of history. And he's taking very interesting sources from early 20th century anthropology and scientific evolutionary theories. So Gordon Shield, I'll write the name down, one of the great archaeologists. Childe. He distinguishes between, so Lukács is quoting from that, he's distinguishing between a tool which is an improvisation, which means what? Which means that suppose a human being, primitive man, finds a dead animal or any dead thing, a living being which is dead now, and takes the bone, a part of the limb which is of a dead creature, which is the bone, and then uses the bone as a tool. That is possible. So in that sense, using a bone as a tool is kind of improvisation. It is thinking, of course it is thinking, because you have to conceive of the bone as something which can be used in a certain way. For instance, to like a hammer. You can't do it. At the same time, it is to say that you still don't have a concept of the tool. You have the use of the tool, which is also kind of thinking, but you don't have a concept of the tool. So even the tool has two stages. The tool has a kind of improvisation, and the tool as a concept. And so this improvisation, of course, goes deeper into evolution, because part of the possibility of tools comes from the nature of the physiology of the human being. So there is a very, very crucial book written by the anthropologist André Leroy-Gourhan called Speech and Gesture, which some of you must read. André Leroy-Gourhan. It's not mentioned in the reading. The reading list is incomplete, so don't worry about that. André Leroy-Gourhan speaks of a particular stage which is called the prehensile stage of the human, of hominization, of the ape. So the prehensile stage is when the human being can now grip. Prehensile stage is the grip. So the human being can actually hold a tool because of the nature of his hand. So the human hand and the human tool come together. So to that extent you think that there is a kind of extension of nature into the physiology of man as part of hominization or evolution, which then makes the tool possible. Nevertheless, the philosopher will rigorously, he will not object, but he will intervene and interpose the question, but even for that, the human being must posit the concept of the tool. And to that extent, the means of labor is already made. So this mediation is unending. It's not just one mediation, that labor mediates between man and nature. Labor mediates to create something which becomes a means of labor. And in that sense, the history of technology is a history of complexity. Because the complexity of this mediation keeps carrying. Now, of course, philosophically but also scientifically, a very profoundly difficult question comes to mind, which is this. That is labor then some kind of precursor, some kind of a ontological leap, to use Lukács's image, an ontological leap into a stage which then, in a sense, is a stage of man as thinking, man as capable of conceptualization. This is not to be, all of this is to prepare for the moment of Mao later, which is to break down the hierarchy between, and Gramsci also partly, break down the hierarchy between manual and intellectual labor. So it has nothing to do with intellectual labor. It is something to do with something like a capacity. Is the capacity for thought a kind of irreducible attribute of the human being, which in a sense is a leap. It is not to be found in nature, body, physiology. Is just a thesis? In that sense it's ontological. It's pure being as leap, or the leap of labor. And labor, in a way, the possibility of making a history out of this. Would that be a hypothesis at this crossroad? Or would the hypothesis be that yes, of course, there is something singularly interesting about the human being as laboring, but even this laboring has some particular biological invariants. So specific biology, which is the biology of the human being. Not the biology of the general domain of nature and animals and so on, but something which is the animal, which is the human being. So a lot of stakes are there in the way we look at biological knowledge, what we make of biological knowledge. And we'll come to that, but not in general. I don't want to connote something you should rely on. But I will look at it through Marxists, because I'm looking at the history of Marxism from Marx up to the present, with stakes in this question. And one of the important reasons to look at the history of Marxism is precisely to show and see that the history of Marxism is an internally, contested, divisive history. It is not merely contested. There is nothing like a consensus in Marxism on basic questions, on fundamental questions. But of course, while there is no consensus, there is, in specific conjunctures or situations, enormous commitment. But the commitment is not a reflection of a consensus. And the greatest thinkers and the greatest militants of Marxism are the ones who have been able to sustain both these things. I'm not a moralist. So again, this is just a statement coming as part of my documentation, or my presentation of the documentation. I'm not a Marxist moralist or a moralist about Marxism. But I want to say this, that the greatest militants of Marxism are the ones who have sustained the contestation in Marxism and the commitment to what they are committing. And not make the commitment a mask for forcing a consensus, and not make the contestation an excuse to not commit. This is a very important part, the best side of the history of Marxism. In that light, given this in view, we have to ask the question, in the milieu of this contestation, or even, as I said, not merely contestation, but deep fissures, deep divisions. So history of division is something in a very brief encapsulated form I am presenting. So Marx, yes, always Marx, but one reading which is early 20th century Lukács. But a reading which clearly seems to find, like I said, a support of this large thesis on labor as mediation, as complexification, as intrinsically related to society and technology, and so on and so forth. But taking all of Marx more or less in the sense of a unity. Not a flat unity, of course, not a simply a monotonous unity, a complex unity, but still a unity. So Lukács will not agree with anyone who says within Marx there is contestation. So we are not only talking about the history of contestation in Marxism, we are also talking about the possible history of contestation within Marx. So Lukács is someone who will not accept such a position. That Marx is someone who within his own work or his life presents any kind of essential division or essential inconsistency or essential change. And Lukács is not the only one, there is a whole wealth of thinkers of that time who, with all their own internal difficulties and fissures and fights and a lot of violence happening at the real level, because the states, the socialist states at that time, Russia in particular, Soviet Union in particular, is also a coercive state machinery where philosophy is at stake. So Stalin is someone who takes philosophical policies to the extermination camp. So it's not just extermination camp for practical reasons. Philosophy is at stake in death camps, and death is at stake in philosophy. It is that interesting and that bad. In that milieu, thinkers are thinking. They are still thinking. All the time they are thinking. And not in this, the axiom being, repeating Gramsci, everyone is a thinker. Everyone is an intellectual. So we are not talking about specialized intellectual. We are talking about universality. Nevertheless, given this picture, there comes a time, so I'm of course also making some reads myself, which are only schematic, not ontological, which in the 60s, with a set of French thinkers, became a very, very radical and drastic position again, or thesis, which said that Marx can be divided up at the very heart of Marx, at the center of Marx, into two parts. Across the heart of Marx, which is a young Marx and a mature Marx, which is an ideological Marx and a scientific Marx, which is a Marx who, in that sense, was, and this is the most serious part, who was thinking, but thinking not on his own. He was thinking along the lines or based on the essential principles of a thought which was not his own. Though he was making very, very powerful revisions and changes and modifications and recombinations. But essentially, he was not thinking on his own. He was thinking through at least two discourses. The philosophical discourse of Hegel and the economic discourse of political economy of that time, particularly Adam Smith, David Ricardo and others. Now, this kind of a thesis was a very powerful thesis. And it was headed by a person who himself was a comparable figure to Georg Lukács in terms of his position in the party. Was it Louis Althusser? So Louis Althusser, in the period that he was teaching, and he was an inspiring teacher, it seems, in France, is also the chief ideologue of the PCF, of the French Communist Party. And very quickly, the story is also something very clear, and it has happened again and again, that the teacher disappoints his students or her students in his commitment, in his position. No one is saying about commitment, but his positions were unacceptable to his students, to a lot of students. And yet, as a teaching, he was someone who was eternally present in his students' morals. So his teaching was in a way a challenge to his own position. At least this was the view of his own students. So this happened in the events and conjuncture of 1968, when there was a nationwide, comparable to the Paris Commune, a kind of arrest of the whole city by the students and the workers. And the PCF took a position on the events at that time, which was definitely not in support. And Althusser was an ideologue of the PCF, of the French Communist Party. So there was a contradiction, and that's always a very interesting contradiction between the teaching and the teacher.
So was this a 68 demonstrations?
Yeah, I mean, post-68, along 68 demonstrations. All of those things that are going on. So I'm just giving you again a summary picture, not the details, because we're not talking about 68 here, particularly. But what I'm saying is something else. What I'm saying is the teaching and the teacher cannot be collapsed. And yet, the desire for the identity of the teacher is very strong. So you want the teacher to be with you, not to lead you, but to show consistency, because his teaching has inspired you to do what you're doing on the streets of Paris. You want the teacher with you, and you find the teacher is opposing you, or at least is the voice of that very oppressive organ which is the Communist Party. So, do you reject the teaching? No, you do. You of course question the teaching as it is to be questioned through the method of critique and all. But you actually live out the contradiction between the teacher and the teacher. This is a very, very powerful example of a lived contradiction by the students of Althusser and Althusser himself. And so what you find is projects that Althusser was in a sense the leader of, which are huge monumental projects, like the project called Reading Capital, Reading of Marx's Capital, in which Althusser and his students make the thesis that in Marx you can actually draw a cut, or a kind of what they call epistemological break, a rupture, between his pre-capital position and the thesis of capital, which is a scientific position, before that is a kind of ideological. And it is a joint work. It is a work written by several thinkers together, one of which is someone who is very popular now globally, is Jacques Rancière. So Jacques Rancière is part of that school. But Jacques Rancière is one person who was one of the first rebels. And his rebellion was both practical and also theoretical, which I don't have the time to go into. But he was a rebel, theoretical rebel also. But he is part of this project, which is the monumental project of Reading Capital. And yet it is a project which is an iconoclastic project, because it says that in Marx we can actually draw a division which is a schematic, clear division between his scientific thesis and his ideological position. So I'm going to now immediately go to this citation from what is called what is Jacques Rancière's table of amphibologies. Amphibology is it's a kind of logical list kind of a figure of logic. I'll not explain it to you. You will see how it operates when I explain the actual terms. So he's reading in this Jacques in this part reading capital. So again, just to put you up to date, put you on the map of the history of population. Reading capital came out when I was reading capital. Sorry, I was reading capital in 1986, I think, first time in JNU, because of again friends who were helping me go through the difficult texts. It was an abbreviated version with only two writers, Louis Althusser and Etienne Bonnot. Recently, the unabridged volume has come, which has 6 or 7 writers. So the second presentation or contribution is by Jacques Rancière. Etienne Bonnot and Pierre Machin, others come later, but Jacques Rancière is the second after Althusser. And Jacques Rancière has 2 chapters, basically 2 sections. I'm going to only speak about one section. One section is economic and philosophical manuscripts, and the second section is on capital. And in these 2 sections, he actually tries to show, through a reading of Marx, how Marx moves qualitatively as significantly from in a decisively new position to a new position in capital from economic and philosophical manuscripts. And in economic and philosophical manuscripts, and that is the meaning of amphibology, it is that for every economic concept there is actually the articulation or a hidden layer or a kind of logical level which is a higher level, which is anthropology. So the specificity of the economy in Marx's own writing in 1844 is actually always to be diluted or even to be subject to a general economy. The principle is anthropology. And this is evidenced in Marx's terminology. And that is a feature of anthropology. You alternate between 2 kinds of terms for the same thing. So, you look at this table. Can you see the table? Can you read? Yeah, all of you can read what's written out there. Yeah. So, I can't see that. So, you start on the one side of economy. On the other side, for economy, you have a philosophical term, which is critique. So the economy, which is a specific kind of activity, I mean, we don't have to define economy, we kind of understand what economy is. For economy, we immediately have an anthropological move, which is to say it is a larger idea of philosophical critique. So what is the unit of the economy? The worker. This we understand in terms of someone who is the laborer, who does something which is labor. But immediately what you have is the accompanied term, which is not worker, but anthropological subject, or the universal anthropological subject, which is man. So who is the worker? Essentially, it is part of, Marx says, in economic and philosophical manuscript, it is a species being. Man is species being. Man as the particular species which labors. So labor is not the principle. Labor is subject to the principle of something like a law of the species. So man. Then you have the term, again following from worker, labor, right? So you would say, okay, labor is what is involved in work, or the worker. But again, Marx immediately moves anthropologically into the second term, which is generic human activity. So the species being which is man, that anthropologically that specific being which is man, has his or her essential generic activity, which is something like labor. So labor is, in other words, ontological in this sense. Labor is the being of man. Labor is generic. Labor is not making that particular piece of work. Labor is not concrete labor. Labor is the entirety of man's generic activity. So this is indeed a kind of totalization of labor as ontological. Yet, it is not labor. Labor is the mediation between the anthropological subject man and the larger milieu of nature. So you move between generic activity and the specific economic idea of labor. And so you immediately get something very obvious. What does labor make? Product. Yeah, products. In capital, he will speak about use value. something you consume, something you need. It responds to necessity. But at the very moment, again, an anthropological move, he says thing, object. So, the moment you say object, you're again using a term which is abstract. Everything is an object. Object is that which has a kind of essence, which is the counterpart and opposite of the subject. What is the object? Object is that which the subject posits. The subject is related to the object in the nature of someone active and something passive. Not the simple economic idea of the product to be used. But the product immediately anthropologically also becomes a higher order philosophical idea of something like object. Now we come to the main point. And you see, this is interesting. Because when you move from this part, product, object, till now we are moving on a general level. You come to something which is the historical level. So you actually move into history. This is the cut of history. But Marx doesn't quite talk about it, though it is obvious. Actually, Marx does talk about it. So that's the wrong way. Marx talks about it. But all the time he's actually talking about the experience of capitalism. So capital as something which is a form of production, which is a relation of labor to something which is the nature of wealth, money, and all of these things. So capital is a kind of economic relation. Capital is something which we immediately recognize to be part of us and yet outside us. So for instance, you will look at a building and you say it's capital. So that it can be used to reinvest it for other things. So capital is a kind of something which can be reinvested. Something which has an objective character, but at the same time has a relationship to subjects. So that much we understand. But Marx says something very striking, and in a way historically produces the most decisive experience, or the concept of an experience for modernity, modern man, if I were to put it like that. Which is, he says, that capital is estrangement. Capital is a relationship which is subjective. Capital is not merely an objective relationship of property that is owned and labor who works under that ownership of someone else. Labor who has no ownership of the property and labor who works on that property. No. He says, Marx says, this is a relation which is subjectively lived by labor or by the worker as estrangement. So I don't want to go into German and all that, but these German words are very important. Marx uses at least 3 German words. So I'm only going to cite to you English translations. Though there are 3 different closely related words, and yet they are different. So at least 2 let me start. And the third word, for people who are interested in theatre, well, you should take notice of the third word. The first 2 words are, they translate into estrangement, I've written this down, and alienation, famous. But the third word, Verfremdung, is used by Bertolt Brecht in the 20th century, very closely related to Marx's word, which is Entfremdung, which is alienation. But Brecht uses it as a positive strategy. Brecht says in the theatre, we must actually produce a strategy of estrangement, so that this estrangement makes us analyze things as they are instead of being lost in them as in subjective, emotional sort of catharsis. So these German words have very interesting variations. So Brecht himself is a Marxist, takes a word very close to Marx, and yet produces a strategy which is the opposite of Marx's association. Because Marx says that alienation is precisely the distress of the worker. Alienation is what destroys the worker. Alienation is that which makes the worker's life a life of great sadness, in which the worker looks at himself in the object that he himself has produced and feels himself as someone alien. So the worker is alienated in the radical sense. The worker is her own alien. So it is a very, very powerful thesis. The worker is not merely alienated by something else. The worker is alienated by something else, which is a product, so So, I walk on a street and I watch a particular piece of cloth that I have sewn in the factory and I can't buy it. To that extent, I'm alienated from my own product. But I do see myself in that cloth, that rich silk that I have actually woven or been part of weaving. Not the silk itself, which I desire to consume and I can't. That is obvious. But something which is a process of my own being, generic being, intellectually, physically, and cooperatively with other people. And it is something which is staring at me as inaccessible. That is a serious, much more serious ontological situation where I am my own alien. So it is not merely the objectification of labor. All labor is objectified. That is obvious, that is trivial at all. And anything, people who work at the Maruti factory and can't buy Maruti, and in the course of their work, they strike and some of them have to die, of course have a life of alienation. But the relation of the Maruti worker to the Maruti car is not the same as looking at the Maruti car as something he can't buy. Which he probably can also partly, we'll come to that in a later class. The notion of something like moving from the subject of labor to the subject of debt. Today everyone is a subject of debt. Labor is not anymore a labor. The labor is already someone who has a debt to the bank. Debt to someone. If the farmer is not a farmer but a debtor. So that's a movement from the classical Marxist position or Marxist position to the new condition. We'll come to that later, not today. But that part, the real alienation that Marx is talking about is the alienation of the Maruti worker from himself or herself. Because the work that is Maruti is his or her own work. And that ownness is what produces the alienness. So, labor is not something which is merely opposed to the thing in this view. Labor is opposed to itself. And that's why Marx introduces the notion of essence. Again, very philosophical, clearly ontological, that labor is a kind of essence. Labor is a kind of objectified essence. So it is not merely economic. It is the essence of man that is objectified. And specific conditions of objectification, which is capitalism or capital, produces a kind of affect. Marx doesn't use this word. And I'm so happy he doesn't use this word. Yeah. But it is a feeling, it is an experience, which is alienation. It is subjective. Now, this is the crux of the thesis. This is where we move from the general categories of anthropology to the historical experience of alienation in a particular situation in the middle 19th century of that stage of industrial revolution, which Marx is going to, in his historical works and even in Capital, in different places, is going to describe with great tenderness and clarity about the conditions of the working class, which leads to a whole literature of working class histories up to E.P. Thompson and even after that. So all of this Marx is doing. In Capital, there are parts which are graphic accounts of the house, the residential ilaka of the workers. The holes in the walls in which workers live. The ghettos. All of that is there in Marx. But what is striking is all that real description is actually conceptually introduced in this very movement from product to capital. Because capital is specific to this one. And from capital, we move to something like the basic meaning of alienation, not the meaning, the source of alienation, which is that the worker is paid a wage which is just the wage of his subsistence. So the worker is paid the wage which is exactly the value of the commodities required to keep the worker alive. So we get a notion of subsistence. Yeah. But immediately the anthropological move happens and Marx will say that this subsistence is life. This is not merely a subsistence. It is life. Life understood in the sense of something like and we'll come to that in a moment, and this is also the Ambedkar moment in a way, which is something like dignity. So it is not just a question of life, it is a question of the value of life. So yes, of course, life. But what is a life? Which is a life merely at the level of the animal reproduction of the species. That the work is merely kept alive. Which means it's a question of something like dignity. A life worth living or a life merely lived. So the worth, the question of worth comes in here. But again, worth understood subjectively. Worth as something which is the experience of indignity, which in a sense also produces some value, which is life, which is to be searched for beyond this life. So to that extent, the worker also has a subjective force of rebelling against this dignity, of rebelling against this indignity. But that apart, the notion of life as dignity is brought in, as different from the notion of life as merely economic in Marx. And then we come to two summary terms, which is exactly what I talked about, value. So value is what? Value is measurable, value is price, value is that which I can convert into money, and value is the other sense of value. Value is something which is worth. Value is something without which life is not worth living. So both these meanings, again anthropologically, are very closely mixed with each other or layered, articulated with each other. And then finally, from value, we come to the question of exchange, because after all, the whole process economically is a process of exchange. The worker exchanges his labor power for wages, his labor for wages. This exchange. So the moment you say exchange, you think of what? You think of a market. You think of an institution. You think of a marketplace, something empirical, something really that you do, you exchange. But immediately at that level, because of the nature of this exchange, which is clearly alienated and clearly something unjust, what you get is the worker's relation to community. So the worker is not merely on the marketplace. The market itself is part of an institution which is a communitarian institution. And to that extent, it is a community which is clearly based on unjust relationships. I'm not saying exploitative. Why? Because the concept of exploitation is not there in economic and philosophical landscapes. So all of this demonstration is actually Rancière's labor to show that all of this is still not scientific. It is still based on some kind of an anthropological premise, which is there is the idea of a dignified human being. It doesn't show the actual nature of capitalist injustice. It just says subjectively that capitalism is unjust and the worker is reduced to subsistence, and that is undignified. But it does not show you the actual structure of capitalism. And that's why the term or the concept of exploitation is not there in economic and philosophical landscape. This is what Althusser, Rancière and others are trying to show. So very quickly, we don't have much time. This brings us to the final kind of point, which is a general image of that for which you did all this, the work, the experience of alienation, the exchange. I'm leaving out the trade and that thing. This is something which we can talk about in discussion. Which is wealth. Remember the name of Adam Smith's great book, inaugural book on political economy. What is it called? The Wealth of Nations. So the idea of nation and wealth as something which is not merely to be consumed, not merely to be utilized, but something which is the nation. So the idea of development, capitalism, kind of nationalism, a kind of subjective pride in nations as developing and so on and so forth is already, the seeds of all that is sown in the idea of wealth of nations. Not a wealth which is meant to be used, but a wealth which in itself exists. In a sense, wealth is that final idea, final horizon towards which you seem to move. But we must also remember that wealth is an idea that predates question of production of wealth. So there are symbols like gold, for instance. Religion has a very strong relationship with symbols of wealth. Not only because of the fact that great churches and temples and such places possess wealth, but they also they manifest wealth. So religious institutions are interesting because they go in both directions. Some institutions, like monastic institutions, they want to manifest poverty. Some institutions. Now, whether they actually are poor or not, it's a totally different question. With all organizations, they need to have some kind of wealth. But the manifestation of poverty is very important for certain kind of religious institutions. And the opposite. Certain religious institutions, certain churches, certain temples, you can take examples from different religions, have an agenda, have a real program of manifesting. So I deliberately use manifesting as in appearing, as manifestations of wealth, appearances of wealth. So in temples, Travancore, Guruvayur, in the Roman Catholic Church, again and again what you see is wealth called res sacra, sacred things, which are not meant to be sold, which are not meant to be alienated. So you can't actually use those things. So a lot of debate happens that people who don't really give value to religion will say, why don't you use it for the betterment of mankind? And the other side will say, no, how can you say it? The very value of this particular religion is in the holding of that wealth as a kind of pure symbol of something which is glorious. So wealth in that sense has something which is what I call surplus of aesthetics. Always. Wealth is not merely economic. It is economic with a surplus of aesthetics. There's always a surplus aesthetics about wealth. This you find in Marx, again written in between Thesis on Feuerbach and Economic and Philosophical Manuscript, in a very beautiful way. Some of the most beautiful passages in Marx are written about how labor actually produces human sensuous activity which leads to enrichment of the human senses, or the human world. So it's not a question of art as something which artists make. It's a question of everything that human beings do and make. Because everything that you make is a product of the senses and contributes to the experience of senses. So in Thesis on Feuerbach, we don't have the time for this, but everything is also a debate with Feuerbach at this stage. Ludwig Feuerbach was a great atheistic Hegelian. So there are two kinds of Hegelians, left Hegelians and right Hegelians. The ones who are mostly atheists, followers of Hegel, readers of Hegel, and the Christian readers of Hegel. So we have a debate between the left Hegelians and the right Hegelians. So in this case, Marx is entering into a polemic, into a debate with left Hegelians. A pre-Marxist left. So he's saying that Feuerbach's problem is, so there's these theses on Feuerbach, brief thesis, but very powerful, in which he says, Feuerbach's, and this is the 12th thesis I think, Feuerbach's problem is that he looks at objective production of human sensuous activity. So actually human beings, make buildings, make everything, tables, chairs, dresses, books, human beings make so much. And in a sense enrich this world, which all then contribute to further enrichment of the human being, human society and so on. And the trick is, according to Feuerbach, to make all this look like the work of God. So man is externalized into God, where God actually expresses only the essence of man. This is his very elegant but simple Hegelian logic. There is no God, but we say everything is God's creation insofar as we are alienated into, we make something God, which is an externalization, alienation of our own senses, of our great human activity. But Marx says he only speaks of it objectively. He speaks of it, this essence, as if literally God has made the world in the sense of, the biblical idea of creation. But in terms of God has made the world, it is as if the world exists like an object. And this is Marx's really entry into Marx's own specific genius of thinking subjectively, thinking in a revolutionary way. Marx says, what is missing in Feuerbach is the subjective side of sensuous activity. Human sensuous. So here for the first time probably, Marx's practice. Human-centrist practice. What Feuerbach does not sufficiently think of is human practice. Not merely the result, not merely the object. So wealth understood in both sides. Wealth understood as things of the world, beyond only consumption, but also wealth understood as a kind of practice of human beings through their senses to make things, but by making things to enter into new practice. So kind of continuous subjective modification. In modern Deleuzean philosophy, you can say becoming. A kind of endless becoming. This in economic and philosophical manuscripts is probably the most uplifting moment, given that the historical experience at that time is one of alienation and distress. And yet, the horizon is uplifting. The horizon is something so uplifting as this kind of enrichment. Now, very quickly, all of this changes with Capital, according to Ramsey, Althusser, and many others. And it's up to us to read Capital and see whether such a change is indeed the case or not. Now, I don't have the time to go into the details because I've just planned this class for giving you a kind of snapshots. But I'll just mention 2 or 3 points. Now, one of the questions of Capital, so you can start with just Capital's beginning. So this is in the middle 1860s. The beginning of Capital has nothing to do with capitalism, apparently. Nothing to do with the historical experience of capitalism. It is to do with analytical categories, which are what Marx himself calls a simple fact. He says, what is a simple fact? The simple fact is that commodities are there, commodities are present, which are exchanged. And he immediately puts to your problem. This is the problem is that or through money and all that you can go into. But simply the logic of the exchange of commodities apparently is not logical. How do you exchange 2 units of corn with 4 units of iron? Now, of course, there's a logic. That logic is the practical logic of, well, neoclassical economics, which is the economics which in the 19th century up to now will be the dominant economics, which is the economics of demand and supply. So someone will say, you possess that in surplus and you only consume, of 10 units you consume only 6 and 4 are left, and I need silk or I need corn and I have surplus something, cloth, and I exchange that which you need and I take what I get. Because of the equation of demand and supply. Now, this is something which is a logic, which is a practical logic, and in a way dominates economic theory from 19th century onwards. It's something which is taken as the obvious fact of what Rancière himself calls an economic fact. But this is the interesting thing. When I was reading Capital again this time to bring to you, I sat up with this observation. That he does not speak about market, Marx. He speaks about exchange, but something which is obviously, empirically, obvious, that exchange happens in a market, something like a market. He does not mention market. He says exchange and talks about the problem of exchange. He does not say demand and supply because, it seems, demand and supply will only be an economic idea at the institutional level. While for Marx, the idea of exchange is social, and society is not reducible to institutions. So this is something you will find in Adam Smith, and depending on the economists, modern economists, even Amartya Sen, I've heard him speak, and heard him talk in interviews, things like that on television and other places. And he has also, in a sense, spoken of the market as a kind of natural human institution. Basic human institutions which make human beings social. Market. It could be that it is such a thing, but Marx's method is not to take anything empirical as his starting point. This is because, and you understand why is he doing what he is doing. Because as you read Capital, you realize the market is not a neutral idea. The market is already a site or a terrain, to go back to my human terrain system metaphor, a terrain where real social relationships are played out, which are relationships of power, relationships of money, and other kinds of relationships. So there is nothing like a neutral institution called the market. Even if empirically in all societies there is some kind of market. So that's why Marx will not start with something like art. He will start with the notion of exchange, the concept of exchange, and a simple level. And he will say the concept is difficult, it's a problem. Concept is a problem. Why? Because often dissimilar things we exchange. The only way that you can grasp such an exchange or make this relationship logical is to find, and all this is very obvious, but I think we need to take these steps slowly in the obvious direction. So Marx says, at the beginning of the first chapter of Capital, the only homogeneous common thing between two dissimilar commodities is that they are all made from labor. They all have some kind of congealed labor title. And yet, immediately he raises an objection to himself. He says, but that labor is different in each case. The labor which makes corn, which is kind of farming labor, and labor which makes cloth, which is a kind of small-scale industrial labor, and a labor which is industrial labor, which is large-scale industrial, these are all different. Yeah. So again, the history of labor is a history of different kind of guilds and institutions specific to those kinds of labors. How can you then say, labor is the common substance between the two? Because these are different kinds of. So the first chapter, incidentally, is called Substance and Magnitude of Value. So we have to arrive at two concepts, or two clarifications. What is the substance of value and how to measure that, the magnitude of value. And in doing this, he's saying that the common substance is labor, and yet he's raising an objection, but it cannot be a common substance because these are different labors, clearly. So he makes the simplest and the most decisive move from which, in a way, he produces a criticism of his own earlier work according to Marx. Which is, he says, hence we have to understand that this is not labor as in concrete labor, particular labor. It is labor which is abstract. Labor which is abstracted from its real material process. So you see, at this level, what he has done, something which is at the level of the very, very language of labor. He has taken away from labor its pathos. He has taken away from labor its power of being something which is subjective, which is specific, which is historical. He has already said labor is not the labor that you do or I do. It's abstract. He also uses labor power. It is a kind of labor power. Now, this is at one level very obvious that, okay, there is something basic which is labor power. But this labor power is something which has to be now given a value. It has to be given a value. And only based on that value can you measure how much labor power has entered into one kind of product and how much has entered into another kind of product to make exchange possible between those two products. Now, so he himself foresees an objection to this. He says someone can say, oh, if labor time is what produces, value, then someone who is an idle worker, बैठे हैं आराम से कर रहे हैं, तेरा थोड़ा कर रहे हैं, तो ज़्यादा value produce कर, क्यों ज़्यादा time लगता है? Makes no sense, no? So again, Marx makes fundamental analytical move. He says, which is not analytical. It is already so philosophical, but very different from the powerful Hegelian philosophy of his own, earlier beautiful writings to Lukács and other such people. He says that the labor that is common is not the real concrete labor, that's literally the labor of the individuality of the laborer. It is labor power in the sense of socially averaged labor. It is the socially averaged homogeneous labor power. So it is homogeneous labor which is socially average. So which means if I take a product, say this camera, and if I were to look at this camera as the product not of your labor or my labor. So I could take 15 days to do something with it. Someone else could do, a smart person can do just 4 hours. I have to find an average between them. and then say this is the average social labor. So it is also, you see, it is social labor. So labor is again denuded. Labor is stripped of its affective individuality at the start. Its evocation of experience. Here labor is structure, labor is a relation. And to that extent, this is something which is another Ambedkar moment in Marx. So in the first case, the Ambedkar moment was the moment of dignity, question of dignity, which was a question of experience. And here, it's a question of relation. So remember what Ambedkar said about caste. And this is only at the level of some association. We'll work this out later. What did he say about caste? Yes, the experience of caste is an experience, which is the experience of degradation. We spoke about it in the beginning. But he says that yet you must understand caste, grasp caste as, in annihilation of caste, he said, as wrong relation. So it's a relation. There is nothing like a single caste. There are only castes. And that means caste is a relation of multiplicity, which produces the degradation, or which is the condition for the degradation of certain castes. So again, this is not to be at all made into an equation between Marx and Ambedkar. Absolutely not. What I am giving you is what I am calling the moment. It is only the moment. The meaning of dignity for Ambedkar and the meaning of dignity for Marx cannot be the same. Precisely because of what we are going to discuss next time. The difference between division of labor and division of laborers. Precisely for that reason, it cannot be the same. And that's why this ironic relationship that I can, speculate about Mao and Ambedkar. And yet, it is a real question. And in a similar way, the question of relation, the caste relation and the relation of capital and labor is not homogeneous or homologous at all. But at the same time, the fact that it is a relational nexus, that the identity of the subjects comes out of the relation and does not pre-exist the relation, is something I think to note in both Marx and Ambedkar. Methodology. Anyway, I'm going to finish now in 10 minutes. So, we have in capital already a meaning of society which is not a subjective idea of society, or society is a kind of subject that you see in EPM. In capital, what you see is society as relation, society as a kind of structure. And this you find as you go along, in the very first chapter itself, to the point where you find that labor power is that which is the abstract common substance which is between all differential specific labors, and it is this labor power which is commodified in capitalism. So again in capital, history is introduced in the very categories of capital. So history is not introduced as external description. History is introduced in the very category. How? Because it is only in capitalism that you find that something like labor becomes a principle. How? Because here labor is for the first time sold as labor power. Of course there is always labor power. Every time there is differential labor, there has to be a common labor power. But it is in capitalism, Marx says, that you have the commodification of labor. So when a free wage worker, Marx also says in the last chapter, not last, but one of the last chapters, called very interestingly, you should read that chapter, The Secret of Primitive Accumulation. You should read that chapter. It's one of the great chapters of Marx's writings, where he says that primitive accumulation is a kind of secret script. It's like a writing, but a hidden writing, like one of those invisible inks. So in primitive accumulation, which is written in an invisible ink, while on top you have capitalism, as if capitalism is the logic of all history. And yet capitalism contains in secret ink, as crypts, as hieroglyphics, as old illegible languages, the history of primitive accumulation, which is always part of capital. So unless there is accumulation, there is no capital. Capital is always accumulation. Capital is more accumulation. But for capital, there already has to be accumulation. So he also, to go back to the biblical metaphors in Marx, uses with great irony, almost bitterness. He says it is the original sin of mankind. primitive accumulation. So you should read the two chapters together. The first chapter, which is purely analytical, it seems, and the primitive accumulation chapter, which is a historical narrative of this kind of secrecy. And yet the two are together. You can read them together. Why? Because the very fact that commodities that the worker is selling, not the particular thing that a free producer sells. A peasant producer sells, an independent producer sells, but sells his labor, a labor power. This means that something which is intrinsically human and at the same time abstract, which is a kind of capacity, but not a capacity. This is the debate, and I'll finish with addressing this, which is not really a capacity, but something which is a fundamental subtracted reality, which is labor in its minimal articulation, in its minimal logic. This labor power is precisely that which is sold by the free proletariat. So you see the irony of this. The free proletariat. The proletariat is free, but it's a proletariat. Remember the meaning of proletariat. Proletariat is pauperized. Proletariat is someone who has nothing to hold on to, no ownership, no stakes. So Marx will say, no stakes in this world. Yeah? So change the word and so on and so forth. But free proletariat. Because that is the formal condition of the proletariat. That you're free to sell your labor power is different from feudalism like serfs or slavery and so on and so forth. But, so this is the logic. But you see the last, so I'm just going to the last sentence, last paragraph of the first chapter. And that brings us to, again, something which is not disturbing, but intriguing. And Marx is very sort of robustly business-like there. And Marx says, labor is all very well, but we want to know which labor counts, or any. Which labor counts. So this is, again, you feel a bit strange. Then why is he talking like that? And he says, look, we are interested in labor which is for exchange. Labor which is meant for exchange. That is labor power, as meant for exchange. Commodification of labor and labor power. But suppose the laborer does the same thing and gives that work of labor to someone as a gift, out of love. We don't come. And historically, he says, and very interesting, because this is a reference which I have worked on in my earlier work, and I'll talk about it later in the question of service. The question of service actually comes in here. He says, suppose a worker produces, or rather a farmer produces tithe corn for the church. That is not to be counted. Now what is tithe corn? Corn. You understand corn. Someone is a farmer producing corn. But tithe corn, not corn for the market. But tithe corn. Tithe is a kind of church tax. Church tax. So Christians are obliged to pay a part of their wealth to the church. It's from the Bible. It's a direct kind of payment to God. And the church kind of holds it for a kind of trustee. Church is a kind of trustee. Now, this kind of payment was done not only in money. Actually, a lot of peasants, farmers would pay in kind. So Ricardo writes about it in his book on rent and labor. Adam Smith actually says tithe is such a waste of resources. Very close to what I was discussing a little while back. The wealth of temples and churches, such a waste. A lot of people would say. Adam Smith talks like that. This tithe is such a waste. Why do you give to the church? Church doesn't do anything. So Marx also dismisses it, not on grounds of religion being what it is and his views on religion and stuff like that. Nothing like that. He simply says that tithe is a kind of service. It is a kind of service which you give. Corn is given as a kind of token of service. So it doesn't count. It is not exchange value. It doesn't count for capitalism, for what is interested in capital, which is the relation of capitalism. Worker in relation to capital. It doesn't count. So this is something which makes you feel very sort of intrigued, that he is very businesslike, very sort of subtractive. He subtracts everything which is not useful for him as far as analysis of capitalism. And yet, if you take it in itself, then something like producing for the church, producing as such is always significant. Because, and this question came up last time, you produce in different modes and different ways in the same society. So people are producing for the temples, people are producing for churches, people are also producing for their own needs. Yeah. All of this is happening. But so in the actual realm of production, there is a multiplicity of types of production. And they're all working as laborers. Or at least the ontological mode of labor is part for them. But Marx in Capitalist seems to be extremely calculative and instrumental about this. He only is interested in looking at what he calls labor that counts. But while you're reading this, you also have moments of a kind of refreshing exception in Marx, or a different way of looking at the same thing. So in Grundrisse, the text I mentioned last time, towards the end of Notebook 3, Marx talks about surplus value. So anyway, we'll talk about surplus value later, but basically surplus value is the surplus that labor produces beyond producing its means of subsistence. So whatever you produce which is equal to the value of your life, that is keeping you alive to work the next day, beyond that whatever you produce is appropriated by others. That is surplus value. And that brings us to exploitation. So the degree of exploitation is measured out of this relationship of the production of surplus beyond what you produce for your own subsistence, your own reproduction of the life process. So that's actually the meaning of surplus value and exploitation, which is a mathematical equation in Marx, which you don't find in the early works. So anyway, I don't want to get into technicalities, that is not important right now. In Grundrisse, he's working on all this, because after all, that text is only 5-6 years before Capital. And he's talking of the question of surplus value. And he's saying, look, surplus value is something which is there, and a lot of economists are trying to, get to grips with surplus value, but no one can quite grasp it. They always, so political economy is actually, has a constitutive ideological blind spot, which is profit. All of political economy, great as they are, including socialistic economists, have all a common blind spot. They are not able to understand profit, something which is surplus. And that is Marx's, in a way, at least his claim. Yeah? So, he says, surplus value is actually the picture of capital as wealth. After all, capital, these malls, these great showy metropolises, global, all of this is what? A show of capital's power, no? So states are also at capital's behest. We talk about global oligarchies today, of which state is only a small part, and so on and so forth. But ultimately they're manifest, so I'm back to that word, manifestation. They're manifested as wealth, not only in consumption, but as wealth. Now, if that is the case, then the question is, this wealth, this tremendous glory of capitalism, well, where does it actually, what is this glory of capitalism actually manifesting? Is it manifesting the exploitation of labor? Yes. But it is not manifesting it, it is hiding it. It is, in a sense, always masking it. It is always trying to show as if this wealth is something which is now part of a new kind of, the new nature. So capitalism is, in a way, the new nature. So you can say new normal, but I would like to say new nature. So all of history seems to be ultimately geared towards producing capitalism as the new nature. So history is only a trick to get to capitalism. That is the kind of absolute idea or ideology of capitalism which seems to be on the cards. But Marx says, does this always work in real people? And he says, no. And he quotes he says a delightful story from the Times. So today we have Times of India, London Times, a lot of Times. Yeah, anyway. So from the Times, London Times. So the London Times quotes the story of a Jamaican, West Indian worker. After the abolition of Negro black slavery, one Jamaican plantation owner is writing, and he's very angry. And he is basically campaigning for the reinstitution of slavery. Why? Because he said that these workers, now that they are free and they are capable of producing surplus value, they just produce that much which they need for themselves, and then they just spend their time idle. While they are free, so he said, they are free to sell their labor power. They are free to be exploited. And they don't, so their luxury goods, their wealth is free time. Their wealth is this indolence. Laziness is their wealth good, Marx says. Rather than the wealth that we look at as the glory of capitalism. So you see, with this, and Marx calls it lightning stone. So in Marx you see this double direction, kind of it moves in both directions. One is this spontaneous glee at someone who doesn't simply give capitalism भाव नहीं देता ना, वो worker भाव नहीं दे रहा, and Marx loves it. And at the same time, Marx says, worker जो भाव, जिसका literally भाव नहीं market में, बाजार में जिसका भाव नहीं आ रहा है, not to be counted. So this is something in Marx which I find to be really of intriguing interest. Not again, my point is that it's not a question of the great unitary system which is Marx or Marxism or whatever. It is a question of the thin thread of these fissures, of these extremely significant and at the same time extremely precise self-differences within the so-called big system. Now all of this on one side, and then in modern reading to a reading of Marx, which is not the Althusserian, Rancière, or this reading of science in Marx. There are at least two readings, but I don't have the time for the second reading. I'll come to that in the next class, which is Alefadiu. But I'll just quote the first reading, because it brings us back to the question of biology, which is a reading based on the inspiration of another inspiring communist thinker called Antonio Negri in Italy, who was in jail for many years. In the 70s he was jailed for at least two events led to his and many other people's incarceration for many years. One was a general strike, a series of general strikes centered around the Fiat factory, the Fiat car factory. Fiat was a car, in fact my family owned a Fiat, in the 70s, because it was a car which was imported, the brand, the Fiat brand, it was an Italian brand. So there were a series of strikes in Fiat leading to a general strike. So I am actually quoting to you three general strikes. I didn't quote to you much from Paris Commune, but that's also there. The 1968 and the Fiat. Though they are very different, but all of them lead to general strikes, not just the factory strikes. So Fiat has a series of general strikes, which are militant strikes, and then of course the actions of Maoist, at that time, red terrorists, what was called red terrorists, who were Maoists basically. So a lot of things happened, kidnappings, killings happened. I don't want to go into the details today, later we can discuss it. But Negri was jailed, very close to some of the things that have happened in our country recently. Jailed with no real proof of being a conspirator with these people. Urban nationalism in India is something which is going around as a thing. At that time in Italy, of course it's a superficial resemblance, but the superficial resemblance is still striking. It was exactly the same kind of charge that Negri was a philosopher or a leading intellectual, was a kind of conspirator in these red actions, the red terrorist actions that were happening in Europe at that time, in Germany, Italy, and other places. A kind of urban national thing in Italy. But of course they're very different because the actual situation there was very different, and one thing we don't have here, so that's a different discussion, but since I've talked so much I have to mention it. Here the event is not red terrorism. There in Italy it was red action. And terrorism is a word I don't use with the value of terrorism today. It is a word used from the subjective side of those very people. So it was explicitly meant to create terror in the hearts of the bourgeoisie. So there is a whole genealogy of the word terror which is a positive genealogy, which we have forgotten. which comes from the French Revolution and moves into sort of Red Terror in the 70s. You can also take Bhagat Singh, of course, as a part of that genealogy. Anyway, that is a different question. In all of this, Negri was somebody who actually was a critic of orthodox Marxism, including Maoist Marxism. Why? Because he was talking in terms of something which is autonomy. So they are also called, these people, Italian autonomists. And what autonomy from what? Autonomy precisely from the principle of labor. Autonomy precisely from the glorification of labor. From the obligatory glorification of labor as something which is to be counted. Labor has this instrumental idea of counting. So one of the slogans of the general strike at that time, starting from Fiat and moving on to other things, was anti-work. Mario Tronti, the great Italian thinker, actually gave this slogan, anti-work, to protest work. The idea of it, the concept of it, it's a philosophical kind of a rebellion against the very idea which is taken as intrinsically good, virtuous, which is work. Again, very differently, but in Faridabad, some of the people I know, my friends, have actually been working on this idea of questioning the virtue of work, or the kind of ideology of work as virtue. Part of the Mazdoor Samachar group, Sheikh Singh is one of the great, committed for a long time, though he would hate the word commitment because he would find it too serious. But still, he is someone who has been bringing out the Mazdoor Samachar for free, to refuse the exchange relationship in a world dominated by it. So always for free. The worker as someone who is anti-work. In that sense, life beyond work of the work. That kind of contribution. So of course these things are also, a lot of debates are there on all these ideas. A book that Mazdoor Samachar brought out in the early 90s, which was really one of the most beautiful books that, I don't know if it's available, for my friends I can try to find out if you're interested. It was called A Ballad Against Work. One of the most beautiful books I've read. A Ballad Against Work. So this is a large landscape of not insulting labor, but in a sense emancipating labor from work. Emancipating labor into something human, something social, from something antisocial or alienating like work. So in this project, what is the idea? So in a kind of Marxist ideal of revolution, change, you can think of class struggle, you can think of proletariat, as a revolutionary class. You can think of end of alienation as a kind of human emancipation. What is the idea that these people find of a kind of lived autonomy? Autonomy which questions capitalism. This is where things become very tricky. Very tricky. But we have to, again, like I said, and this is the last part, we have to present the views in the best light so that we can debate. Neither to accept them nor to simply throw them aside. And I'll tell you why I'm interested in this, precisely to be able to enter the question of service. So I'll give you very quickly the lineaments of their position. So again, it's a question of reading Marx. And here, they read Marx's Grundrisse. So not Capital, not EPM, but this text called Grundrisse, which I already introduced to you last time, which is a very interesting text, also very dense text, disarranged text. Because it's notebooks. It's all notebooks. Jottings. So some sentences are elliptical, almost incomplete, and some sentences run the length of a whole page. One sentence carries on for a whole page. But that's a kind of, because he writes freely as notings, as jottings, not really as publishing work. In fact, Grundrisse was published after a long period of sort of that text having been lost. Probably only in the 1930s was it published. Anyway, so in Grundrisse, towards the very end in notebook 7, I think, and I myself was searching for it, I forgot. So Shomik the other day helped me to find it from the net, that part. which was dealing with a concept, so let me write it down, which in Marx comes just once, but it's something that the Italian economist really sees on. The concept Marx calls, okay, I write it down, general intellect. The concept of general intellect. And Marx says that while capitalism is an experience of, he doesn't use exploitation at that point, but surplus value, extraction of surplus value. But there is something which happens in the course of all this, which is the direct force of production and social productions, which Marx says, and I'm kind of quoting Marx here, social production, the force of social production, which is the production of the very capacity to produce. He calls it new organs of the human brain are added by society. So see, here is a biological statement which is absolutely not biological. How can society add organs to the brain? Unless, of course, you think of medical prosthesis. That's possible. Yeah? But Marx is saying that in the course of production, we add to our lives in such a way that we actually produce new means of intellection, new intelligence. But a new intelligence which is not the possession of one intelligent person and another. So later I will try to show in Ambedkar something which is an axiom of intelligence, which is general intelligence, which is universal intelligence, not the intelligence which is the monopoly of the government or the ideology of the so-called governmental intelligence. So Marx actually speaks about this as the direct force of the general intellect. So general intellect, not the intellect of the intellectual, but the general intellect. But it's a very cryptic and very mysterious but fascinating idea. This general intellect, this direct force, this human brain, additional human organ of the human brain. So human brain is not an organ. The human brain is the subject to which new organs are being added. This is what Marx calls the direct force of the capacity to produce, which is general. Now, these autonomous thinkers, particularly a thinker called Paolo Adorno, he has a very interesting dense text called the Natural Historical Diagram. Something labor and the biological invariant, in which he says that what we have to really look at today is the biological, we have to look at the problem of human nature. We have to look at capitalism as the exploitation not of particular worker merely, or a particular class. It is the exploitation of human nature itself. So something so peculiar as a concept of human nature. So what can be human nature? Because on the one hand, basic Marxist understanding would be that human nature is relative to society, to economic production, to systems of power, politics. How can there be human nature as such? And yet, Paolo Adorno and other thinkers, they take the risk of producing a concept of something like human nature. And they base it on some kind of biological, contemporary biological work. So Stephen Jay Gould is quoted, and maybe other biologists. But let us look at the features of this biological invariant. So there are at least 2 or 3 features. One feature is that while the human species is part of the range of species, of course, animals, if you want, but the human species is also singular in the sense that the human species is prematurely born. The human species is born at a time when it's the child, when the human being is incomplete in terms of this never changes. So human being is always incomplete. Human being is always premature. The human being is never complete. This means ecologically or biologically that human beings don't have environments. While animals, other animals, have environments in the sense that other animals have specialized instincts for specialized environments. So for instance, if a predator is closing in on, say, a deer or any animal, then to the arrival of the predator, the senses are wired in these animals in such a way that they have an exact instinct to respond to that creature. They have an exact instinct to respond to, for instance, the sexual attraction of the opposite sex. They have an exact instinct to respond to certain kinds of situations which are again part of the natural processes. So this question of something like an environment exists for animals but not for human beings. Human beings have to continuously make. Labor is actually something which is a kind of prosthesis or supplement to compensate for lack of environment. So all technology, in a sense, is to fill in the gap of incomplete or insufficient environments. It is also to fill in for insufficient instincts. Now, what happens is, as a kind of history of technology then produces a history of technology emerges on the basis of this kind of insufficient environment. Labor is part of that. What happens is, in this very process, there is something which in biologists call neoteny. Neoteny is in situations of crisis, in situations of lack of knowledge, of basically not knowing what to do. Problem decision. Basically, whenever human beings are faced with a problem of decision, what happens is something like return to primitivism. You then respond by an infantile recollection of earlier situations, which is very different from instinctually specialized animals which respond based on the instinct. If the instinct is not good enough, then they'll die. But human beings have a kind of the prematurity leads to it. They're constant infancy. So there is a continuous danger of primitivism, of returning to an earlier state, or earlier association, earlier recallings, to compensate for the lack of decision-making potential. So all of these are actually biological invariants of the human species, but precisely because of this, human beings have a history of technology, history of prosthesis, history of culture. So the general interest is, according to Werner's interpretation of Marx, is the production of what he calls social and cultural orders. Bernard Stiegler, the French philosopher, speaks of organology. That we are not simply physiologically made by organs. We produce organs. We produce organs at different points in our social and political histories, in our cultural histories. Now, given this kind of a thesis, the historical specificity of capitalism is, according to Paulo Werner and the autonomists, it is that for the first time we have a mode of production, we have a kind of system of production, in which human beings are actually engaged at the level of their very nature. So service, when we speak of service is the direct mobilization of the general intellect. Which means what? Which means precisely because general intellect includes all of us. It includes the human collectivity. It includes the fundamental capacity for cooperation. That general intellect is mobilized by capitalism as something which is a regime of not anymore manufacture of products, but the manufacture of this very ability to cooperate. And this is what could be called the conversion of industry into something like, it's a word which I will always trip over,
hospitality. So hospitalization, hospitalization of work. All work is the production of the possibility of cooperation. So in that sense, today it doesn't matter whether it's a company which is a manufacturing company or it is a service firm. It's an app-based service firm or whatever. Each of them has the same fundamental ontological thesis, which is that we basically invest the human being's intrinsic capacity to produce something like his or her own ability to improvise, to cooperate, to actually connect with other human beings, which is something like network society, something which is a kind of network logic. So I was reading in the latest Outlook magazine, in the crisis of employment today, and all kinds of crisis of statistics and all that, let's not go into that today. Something which is very interesting, in Bangalore, one Bangalore economic project is saying that people are not anymore wanting to invest or spend time in learning skills. Skills to learn to become a skilled worker. Say, something like in the nature of an electrician or in the nature of a computer analyst and so on. Instead of that, they prefer doing service work. So for instance, becoming a pizza delivery boy. Why? Apart from the sense of insecurity about job, we spend so much time in spending so much money and time in learning those skills, we won't get a job. It's also something else. And this is something which is not coming from philosophy, but actual, I forget her name, Supriya or someone who is doing this work. She's quoted by her. And she says that one of the things that, for instance, people who are pizza delivery boys, I don't think girls yet do this work, pizza delivery boys say they would like to do it, they get a glimpse or even a slight contact with upper class houses. They get a sense of what is it to live an upper class life when they go and deliver a pizza. I find this quite shattering. Exactly that which you would think is about a neo-slavery. When we were at one time discussing things like call center work, we are talking of a kind of new slavery, which is also a kind of colonial and new colonial slavery, English language accent and all that. In this, the idea that you go to deliver a pizza and you feel for a moment a good feeling you get because you're in a kind of aspirational neighborhood. And that is a part which has nothing to do with manufacturing, it has nothing to do with anything, but the very idea of the totality of human existence, a kind of human affectivity, human emotions. This kind of work, it seems to me, or this kind of regime, it seems to me, is a new ideology of service. This unpronounceable hospitality logic that I just mentioned. Not only of the hotel industry or the airlines, but of everything. So in that sense, the conversion of all labor into a kind of service. But according to the autonomists, and that's the very last point, according to the autonomists, this is the threshold of a kind of radical change, even a revolution. Why? Because capitalism today has unleashed the idea of human cooperation as its basic ingredient of capitalization. Not anymore skill tool, but the very fact of human capacity, which is generally intellect, is now being mobilized as part of its desire for profit, for capitalization. Once capitalism does this, and this is the wager for these Italian thinkers, once capitalism has done this, they have unleashed a force which they can't control. Because human cooperation will always do something which is beyond only its appropriation and instrumentalization. In that sense, capitalism produces its own logic of a certain kind of post-capitalist excess, which they give a name, not labor, but they call it multitude. Labor, as something defined, becomes something larger, which they call multitude. So they refuse proletariat, because they find proletariat too much in the line of a certain kind of labor-centric Marxism. Instead of that, they speak of multitude. And multitude they understand as this general intent, as this generalized force or capacity to create, a part of which capitalism wants to appropriate as profit. This is, I think, a very interesting development in the reading of Marx in our times. But it seems to me their reading of Marx is basically wrong. I don't mean it only as an academic observation, I also mean it as a significant political observation. But why is this wrong is something I don't have the time to talk about today. So we'll close it here, and maybe next time, if you have the patience, we can discuss. So thank you very much.